Hey guys, it's another Sunday and I'm joined by one of our subject matter experts, Joe Farewell, who you've probably seen in our other videos. And today is another video focused on competition shooting. And Joe is going to be gracious enough to share some tips because shooting the red dot is getting very, very popular in competition shooting. And Joe has a number of tips for you guys working on that transition from shooting iron sights to red dots. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Joe to run through a number of different tips.
All right, guys, we're going to dive into 3 tips for you guys switching over from iron sights over to optics, because there are a few differences, but if you get these things down right, you're gonna be a whole lot faster, more accurate, and you're gonna be joining the technologically advanced crew of people who are shooting red dots on their pistols. All right, so tip number 1 is to make sure that we're maintaining target focus throughout the shooting process. When you're shooting iron sights, everyone wants to talk about keeping that front sight focus, which is really important if you want to make good, accurate shots. However, when we move to a dot, we want to try to keep both eyes open and maintain focus on the target. Now, there are a few situations where there may be exceptions to that rule, but in general, maintaining a good hard target focus is going to let that dot basically overlay, and we're looking for whatever is acceptable. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. But when you're focusing on the target, it allows you to transition from target to target without having to do a focal plane shift that we have to do with iron sights. That allows you to do better transitions while maintaining a high degree of accuracy. All right, guys, now tip number 2 has to do with acceptability of your sight picture. And this is something that coming from iron sights is gonna be a little bit weird because the dot allows you to see all the little movements that you didn't realize you were doing. The first time you pick up a pistol with a red dot on it, you probably feel like you got Parkinson's because the dot's just flying all over the place. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing because you actually have that same movement in your iron sights, you just don't notice it as much. So one of the big hurdles to get over when you're switching from iron sights to a red dot is making sure that we just simply use that dot as a specific focal point for an acceptable sight picture. So whenever that dot lands on the target, wherever it is on the target, as long as it's acceptable, you should be pressing that shot. You don't need to wait for that dot to completely settle and stop moving. It's never gonna happen. Now, the more you practice with it, the more you build that grip up, the more you get a good stable platform, the better off you're gonna be as far as stabilizing that dot. However, it's never gonna completely stop moving. That's just the human body at work. So, find what's acceptable on whatever target it is. Don't wait for it to become perfect and just work with what you've got as far as the dot movement. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate what it looks like for me to try to keep that dot totally stable and the time it takes for me to do that. So I'm gonna go off the draw. We've got an 8-inch plate set up here about 10 or 12 yards, and I'm gonna try to get that dot stabilized before I take the shot. It's gonna look something like this. That shot was dead center of the plate. Now, that dot was pretty much stabilized. There was still a little bit of movement, but it wasn't moving very much. Now, versus me pushing it as quickly as I can, taking an acceptable sight picture, and then going ahead and breaking the shot, even though the dot may be bouncing around a little bit. Stand by. So as you can see there, it's a significantly faster processing speed if I just focus on taking what's acceptable and not worrying about the actual movement of the dot as long as it's on the target where I need to be hitting. All right, guys, our third and final tip is the most important one, and that is natural point of aim. Developing a natural point of aim with a red dot is going to solve 90% of the problems that most people have with red dots, and that's simply finding the dot. The biggest complaint I hear and see on the range when I'm instructing classes, whether they're civilian classes, military, or law enforcement, is finding the red dot in the first place. So what we want to do to achieve that is develop a really good natural point of aim. What that looks like for me is I close my eyes, I go ahead and achieve my normal draw stroke at speed, and then I open my eyes. Now, right now, my red dot is squared up perfectly centered in the screen. If your red dot's not squared up in the screen at this point at full extension when you're ready to shoot, when you open your eyes, and instead you have to make some adjustments to get that dot to come into the screen, we want to make those adjustments without moving our head and simply bringing the gun to our eyes, make the adjustments necessary, and then try to log this position. What we're doing here is we're finding the spot out in space where this gun lines up with our eyeball. You can do the same thing with iron sights where we achieve natural point of aim by aligning front sight, rear sight, and our eyeball. And that's a good thing to do as well. But we really see the problem amplified when you're running a red dot. If you don't have a good natural point of aim, what's going to happen is something like this, where you're like, oh, there it was, there it is, now we've got it. We don't want to do that. So work on developing that natural point of aim, close your eyes, draw the gun, open your eyes, and you should see that dot in the center of the screen. If you don't, make the minute corrections that you need to see that dot line up, and then get the repetitions behind it so that it becomes subconscious and just easy to get every single time. One thing that you can do as well is if you draw and you don't have the dot, but you do have a decent natural point of aim, or at least a good understanding of what you're trying to achieve there. If I come up and the dot's off, instead of wiggling my wrist around like this to try to find the dot, I call it fishing. What I'll do instead is I'll just bring the gun back in a little bit and represent. Bringing it right to here and representing 95% of the time, we'll have that dot pop up in the screen without having to fish for it. And then it's a little bit faster. I like that method. Try it out for yourself, see what works for you, and develop a good natural point of aim. All right, guys, so those are 3 tips that I hope helps you achieve mastery of working a red dot on a pistol. Go ahead and try them out. Leave a comment if one of those helped you more than any of the other ones, and we'll see you on the range.